you can configure a class as generic. So you can simply say that generic class. We can define class as generic. Generally, so a generic class, technically generic class allows to configure generic type memory for generic type memory for members in a class, So generic type memory for members in a class. So that means now while allocating memory, you can define type for members, so that all members will be the same type specified. All members will be the same type specified. So that is what actually the intention of having a generic class. Generally, we configure generic classes. Generic class in options. Right. So technically important here is generally when we are dealing with this, usually. So class can be generic type, configure that as generic type. That means here I'm adding a class as generic type. Let's see how you can configure the class as generic and how do we define the generic class. So let's take here the options. Our project is TypeScript online project. Yeah. So let's add a simple option here. Okay, generic type here. Yep. So I'm adding a class now, generic. So let's create a class. We are configuring a class and a class demo. And demo is using a generic type memory here. This is generic type. So in that we can have a property. So I'm having some property. So some public, some property. This property is generic type, the same generic type. And we are having some method which have some parameters. So that means this add is a method. So we are configuring the add method as generic type. That means here add is a function. I'm just using a reference here. Means let's create it as a type. That means value is t and add is a method, just a lambda type I given. So this is xt and y is also t. And it returns that particular type. You can configure in this way. That means now, so we have represented with a lambda expression here. So this is demo. Class demo value. So here the point is, when we are configuring an object, so let obj is equal to new demo. Now into the memory we need to pass the type, what type it is. So number type, suppose I'm using a number type, then the memory allocated will be a number type. In that case, through that obj, you can access the value. This value will not accept any string. That means this value type is also treated as a number. This value is also a number. You cannot assign it. That means now it will work for a numeric value. And we are adding obj add, and is equal to function xy, and here we are configuring. So return. So we have to return. So x plus y. So that is how it has to handle the functionality. So that means now we are implementing it actually. We are implementing here. That means this add is a method, means it is a function. And it is having the parameters x, y and return x plus y. And observe here, x, y are number type now. Because you are passing, and its return also should be a number type. Its return also should be a number type. It is returning a number type. So that means, so what type you have defined at the time of allocating memory for that particular class, the memory will be based on that particular type. Now here we are adding some reference here. That means printing these details, console.log. And I want to print number. And here we have to define obj.value and configuring everything. Now we are defining here. So console.log, right? And here we are adding. So that is addition is equal to. So this is obj.add. Now we configured and we are defining the functionality into it. So number I am defining in this way. I'm configuring in this way. That means now this is used for handling a number. And important is we can handle for a string. I created another object, obj is obj2. So obj2. So and new demo. This time I am sending a string type. I'm allocating a string type memory for that. And through that we can access the value. This time the value is a string type. So we are using a string type value. We can put anything here. So I'm just adding hello. So some string type of value here. And obj.add is a function. This time it is a function to be implemented. X as string, x and y, and it should return some message. So that is the first name and last name. That means some string x and $y. I'm just printing the string here. I'm just configuring and printing the string here. So now we need to pass the values into this now. Console.log. I am printing the message, that is obj2.value. We are printing the message. And console.log, we are accessing the method obj2.add, and here we need to define the options, right? We need to define the option. The option is what string you want. 2 parameters it is. So one is one parameter, another one is another parameter. We are configuring the parameters in this way. Now here I will open this. So, and I will run this now. So just open and run this. That means now you created a class in such a way. So you created a class in such a way that it can handle the members of same type. All methods can be same type. So properties can be same type, generic type, parameters can be same type, return types can be same type. So we can configure the class as a generic type in order to handle all the members of that class as that specific generic type. That means it should be strongly typed for a specific data type. Then you can use that class as generic type. Now here tsc demo.ts and node demo.js, and you can see it is working fine. So the number is 10, the edition is 30, and hello, it is printing those details. That means we created and configured a class as a generic type so that all the members in the class will be generic type. All the members in the class will be generic type. So what type of data you want to handle in that particular class, then you can configure the members with that particular type. That is mostly used when you are dealing with only specific type of data. So in future, for example, generally, uh, you may think like generally where we use this. Actually, in future, when you are dealing with data, so when you are working with the data, when you are dealing with the data, so we need to create a library. We need to create a library for handling specific type. We need to create a library for handling specific type. For example, generally, one simple point I will tell you. Actually, suppose we have to connect with the database. We have to connect with the database. And for that, we have a connection class. Connection class provides set of properties and methods to connect with database. Now, important data sources will be different. Like MySQL is a data source, Oracle is a data source, like MongoDB is a data source. Data sources are different. But the connection class is same. Connection class is same. Now, this connection class should be a generic type. So because whenever you are using this connection class, because inside this class there are some members. So this connection uses a command. It uses a command, or you can simply say that command or query. It uses a command or query to communicate with the table. So it uses several other members. And when you pass into the connection as Oracle, then all these members should work for that particular type of data source. That means Oracle have specific type of members, and all should so with the class also can be defined with user defined generic types. User defined, that means I will pass MySQL into it, then these members should work for MySQL. And I pass MongoDB into it, then these members should work for MongoDB. That means one class should work for different types of data sources with different type. So then you need to create a generic class. Well, allocating the memory into the generic class, you will pass the type, and all the members should handle that specific type. All the members should use that specific type and configure that specific type. That means here, what should happen is implementation is required. So later in different occasions, we will use that. Implementation is required for that. For example, the basic example is this. This is a basic example. So how we configured a generic class. Basic example how we configured a generic class. Usually this generic class, suppose I am creating a class as It's a generic type. And in that, so we have so command, so connection. So this is a connection. So connection is an object. Connection is an object. That means we are defining a connection object. So connection is defined as an object type. It can have some details. Connection object can have some details. So, and important here, so it's a type, it's a type is generic. Its type is generic. And we can handle some type of data into it. Connection is a generic type. Just like how you defined the value, how you define the value. Here we are not defining any definition for that. Definition we will implement. This connection is of that particular type. That means we are configuring as T. It is of that particular type. So that means here, so I will give as data source, and the connection is that particular type. It is an object. It should work for that particular object. This can have connection. This can have command, data readers. So many different data communication related objects are required actually. It's fine. So as of now, just I'm giving data source and connection. Now here we have a class Oracle. And this Oracle class is defined with some members. So that means it is configured with members. That means it is having so connection con. So con. And this connection, so or here also we defined connection. Okay, this connection. So this connection is just a string type defined. Okay, and there is a query. Query is also a string type. So we have a connection and we have a query. String type is defined here. These are the two members inside that particular class. It's a type. You can configure. This is an user defined type. This is an user defined type with two options, a connection and query. So here we have another option. So class. This is some MongoDB, and it is also having a connection, and which is a string type, and it is having some command that is a string type. Connection, query, connection, command. Databases will be different, and different approaches may be there to communicate with them. They may have the same connection, so they will have the different query approaches, because MongoDB have a different query approach. That means this is the connection, and we have a command. So we have a command. How you define the method which can return any particular value? That means command has to return something, right? The command has to return something. That means we will configure this command as a, so we will configure these commands. This is command. In the data source, we have a command. And this command is also defined as a string type. So this command is also configured as, suppose, a method. Method means it will expect the command cmd. It is a command generic type, and it should return the generic type. So this type of approaches, or you can configure it to return any type of value. Just you defined a function. So we defined a function, and we want it to return something. So we want it to return something configured here. It's not mandatory that it should have a return, right? So it can configure with anything. Now what we are doing is we are allocating the memory here. That means we are creating let ORA is equal to new data source. Into that we will pass the memory of Oracle into it. Now here ORA, through ORA you can access the connection and command. So here, so we are accessing the connection and the command. This is actually, this command is implementing from this query, because we are not directly creating that object, but it has to use that connection and command. We need to implement that. That means the connection is equal to, and see the type of that connection. It is the type of Oracle. That means we need to define the connection as a string type. Suppose I am defining a value here. Now you can see there is an error. So we cannot define, you cannot define this. Why? Because it is expecting an Oracle type object. That means it is expecting an object, Oracle type object. So this is, you can observe here. So it is a property and it is an Oracle type property. That means it should use two members inside it. One is connection. So it is a string type. Another one is query, which is also a string type. I hope you understood now. That means it should use these two types. Now connection is configured with these two. So that means Oracle connection. So Oracle connection, that's how we have defined. And here I just written a query Oracle connection. And query, here I defined select star from TBL products, something like this. That is how we defined the query. Now similarly, so Oracle dot command. So we have a command here, command is also, so this time command is a string. You can observe that this command is expecting a method and command type, Oracle type command here. That means actually this is expecting a function. This function is expecting an Oracle type memory to be passed into it. That means we are passing ORA, which is an Oracle type memory, and it has to return some value. That means here into this, you can see it is saying that is void is not assignable to this. That means its type, technically its type is void. Means it says is void, is not assignable to the type, right? That means generally it is not returning anything. It is not configured to return any value here, right? Suppose if I define return as T, that means it should return that Oracle type. And here what we have to do is we should use return. What type of object? Oracle type of object it should return. So the parameter of the type and value of that particular return type, that means command is going to return that particular object. So this is little bit complex to understand at the beginning level, because this type of architecture is used to build a library for you. To understand this kind of architecture, we need to first learn all the library related basics, how the library is built. See, in real world scenario, suppose you are learning Java, you are learning .NET or some other Python like technologies. You are using a lot of libraries, importing the libraries and using the libraries. One thing you should know that you are just, after all, a developer who is importing the library and using the library. Somebody built that library for you in such a way that it can handle the interactions for you. You are just, after all, using that library. And the people who built the library, they have to design in such a way that it should serve for different purpose. That means it can be for a specific purpose. It can serve for different purpose. In that case, it can be for specific purpose and it will be for specific or multiple purpose. Then if they have to design a component which have to serve for different purpose, then obviously they have to use these generic types like concepts in the background, or they have to depend on lot of templates. The technologies which are not supporting these generics, they have to depend on lot of contracts and templates to handle this type of architecture. Now this is for Oracle. The same thing you have to use for any another. Suppose I want to use that. Actually, command is a function and it is returning that object. Returning that object. That means an Oracle object is returned here through the command. So to keep it simple, so that means we don't use any query. To keep it simple, just means it will work for Oracle connection, it will work for Oracle query. So here just we are accessing connection, and the connection is having this type where we define the query and all. So I don't need any command here. I don't need it here. So that means here I don't need any command here. Only connection can handle both of them. Then I will later in another example, I will show you. Here we have to just define the connection. It is an object which is of Oracle type, which contains connection name as Oracle connection and query as this. Now how to print this object, you know that. That means what we have to do is we need to get the connection console.log. Console.log. I say connecting. So provider. I say provider. Provider. And provider is equal to. Provider is equal to. So here we need to define Oracle ORA dot connection. Connection is an object. And through that, we have to access that connection property. So that connection property is added here. That is accessed here. That is the provider. Okay. And here I'm using /n and I'm defining here query. So that means here we want to print the query. Query. So query. What is the query for that? What is the query here? The query is so whatever the query is, that means so we have to define ORA Oracle dot connection dot query. We need to access that query. This is accessing the details and printing the details. So I'm using another console.log and I'm using a simple separator here. And I'm creating LET. So Mongo is equal to new data source. This time I'm connecting to MongoDB data source. And the MongoDB data source uses mongo.connection is equal to the connection object. This time it has connection. Connection is same. And the connection is a Mongo connection. Mongo connection. Okay, Mongo connection. And so actually general, I mean technically speaking, actually, so generally Mongo provider, usually if you know about MongoDB and all, Mongo provider is called Mongoose. So it is called Mongoose, right? That is, suppose I said, yeah, so Mongoose. So that is the Mongo provider name actually. So Mongoose. So here actually we can use any name here. Generally, that is the provider name, right? Now, what we can do is that is the provider name. That means I'm giving just this Mongoose is the connection provider name. I will just write that Mongoose. Okay, and here I'm defining. So a command, it will have a command this time, not a query. And usually Mongo commands will not be like SQL queries. They will be command like so db dot tbl products dot insert, like that. That's how the commands will be for MongoDB actually. So that means now I am configuring console.log and provider is equal to dollar. So here we have Mongo dot connection, and here we are accessing in the next line command is equal to so Mongo dot command connection dot command. So that is connection dot command. So we have to access that. That means you created one class which can use different types of sources, configured the sources in this way. And one source contain different connections, another source contain different connections. It can have several more It's not that they should have only these two. Suppose Oracle is having connection state. Suppose there is an option connection state. Connection state is a string. Connection state is a string. Then here in the Oracle, you have to mention that connection state also. You don't need to do that for Mongoose because it is having only this. For Oracle, you have to mention one more additional property here. What is that? So connection state. That means we have to define another, that is connection state. Connection state. So that is a string type. And here I say connected. Connection state connected. So that is how we define. So that means it's not, and we need to print that connection state. So that means this can have additional properties. This can have different properties. Then here I am defining. So connection state is equal to $oracle.connection.connection state. So that is how we are configuring this. And we are printing the details. Here, several more points will come when you are working in the real world scenarios, right? Here we are accessing it and we are printing it. You can see provider is Oracle connection, query is select from table products, connection state is connected. Another one provider is Mongoose and the command is dbtbl products insert. You created one class in such a way that it can handle for different types of objects. In real world scenario, our backend, all libraries built in this way. That means we will have everything generic type. If not generic is supported in your technologies, it will use templates. By using the templates, implementations, inheritance, it uses a lot of extensibilities and manages all this functionality. This is how actually library is built for you. That means this time we are creating a class with user defined type. That means this is an example, generic class with user defined type. Generic class with user defined type. That means not a string type, not a number type. So we created a class which is using the memory of generic. So this is generic type. That means this connection will be of that particular type. You pass anything, it will be that type. Properties, methods, everything inside it can be of that particular type. So initially just I created one property to reduce a lot of confusion for you, right? That means now it is able to one class. Data source is a class. It can work for any data source. Individually, the data sources are built. That means many times this confusion comes for people who are working with such huge environments, like how it is connecting to Oracle, how it is connecting to MongoDB, how it is connecting to MySQL, how they designed that library for us. That means sometimes what happens, different classes are used. Sometimes only one class that handles everything, all the interactions. So we don't need to design different classes. Similar type of functionality can be handled, right? That's what actually the concept of generic. That is the intention of generic. And here you learned so much about that, right? This is a generic class with custom. So that means our own type. This time we are using an Oracle type. So another we are using an MongoDB type. So that it will work for that particular type. The memory is for that particular type. It can handle only those type of values. This is generally how we configure the generic. So generic classes and generic methods. How do we deal with generic classes and methods? That is what actually generics we have. Next, another important, we will see in different examples also. Once you start using Angular, in Angular you will see in different occasions using these generic things. Okay. Now, another important newly added advanced some options into this is so TypeScript TypeScript have options, maps, TypeScript maps and sets. TypeScript maps and sets. Actually, these maps and sets are introduced from ES6 version, ES6 version. So when you try to run this in the old versions, so they will not work into that. Actually, the intention of maps, actually map is used usually to deal with dictionary type collection. Maps are designed to deal with a dictionary type collection. They are used to deal with dictionary type collection. That means a key value collection. Actually, so objects can also have a key value type collection. Object also can have key value type collection. But what is the problem with the object type? So what is the problem with object type? So object is a schemaless, structureless until or unless you make it structured. That means until or unless you define a strongly typed. You define as strongly typed. Schemaless means actually in an object, when you are creating an object. So here I defined one name, that is TV, that is a string type. Another can have names, so which can be a number. This is contradictory. This is schemaless, structureless. One can have one field, another can have two fields. This can have this can have another some cost. This is completely contradictory. So that means it's not structureless, it is completely structureless. So that is structureless. That is the reason. So to handle the structured data and to work with the structured data. So to deal with the structured data. So now a new collection is defined here. A new collection is configured and defined here. That's what actually maps. So that means a map is used for configuring memory map, which can handle strongly typed keys and values. So with the schema base, so with structured data. That is what actually the intention of the map. So that is what actually the intention of the map. So we can configure the maps. And how we define the maps, how we can configure the maps, how do we define the maps? So let's see, how do we work with the map? Generally, there is a lot of difference point actually. Many times in interviews, they ask like, generally in interviews, they ask like, what is difference between an array map and a map? Actually, what is difference between array map and map? Actually, in array also, you have a map mechanism. Right? And important is what is difference between these two is actually one of the advantages of map is actually there is no difference. Both are used for the same concept. So you can use with array combination or you can individually use it actually. The point is map major advantage is, so map is an object. Map is also an object. So map is object that iterates its elements. So in insertion order, it can perform iteration in insertion order. So that means actually, so it internally uses. So for off. So that returns an array of key and value. Key and value. Actually, to deal with key and value, so we need to use separate iterators. Separate iterators. So to avoid that, so the problem to avoid that, so we can simply configure that with a map technique. That means actually we can have an object also. Object is similar to map. It will also allow to set the values. But when you are retrieving the values, so that means you can retrieve the values, you can delete the values. So we can even verify whether it is stored in a specific type or not. So objects so have been creating problem with the structured data, strongly typed data. To avoid that, because they are not a genuine collection of key and value. That is the reason. So a new concept designed by name map. And what is the advantage of this map is the key differences between map is there are so many differences between map and object. So these days, for experienced people, so in interviews they ask these differences actually. So for experienced people, they ask what is difference between map and object. Map and object. That means the important points what you need to know. Simply what we need to know is actually map doesn't contain default keys and values. Default keys. It will not contain default keys. Object contains default keys. Contains default keys. So it can contain default keys. Object can contain default keys. The problem if it contains the default keys, so which can collide. Actually, which can collide with its own keys. Collide with your own keys. When you are dealing with your own keys, it can collide with your own. So you have to carefully verify whether it is having it or not. That means object contains default keys. Even you don't define the keys, by default keys are generated for that. That's the reason actually array is considered as an object. And by default, it will have the keys like 0, 1, 2. These are used as keys. So these are used as keys. By default, it have keys. Don't think that object means only object, because there are so many types which are object type. That is one important option. Another point here is generally, so when you are dealing with a map, another point is map keys. Keys can be any type. Keys can be any type. So important is including functions, including object, or any primitive type. But in object, keys must be object. Actually, keys must be either a string or a symbol type. So what is a symbol or a symbol? So symbol type. So or a symbol type. So what is symbol type? I will show you. That is the key types. That means object can have only string type keys, but here we can have any type of key. For example, suppose when you are dealing with the object, that means some issues with the objects, how you handle those issues. This Oracle, I posted this example now. Yeah. Now here, see, I'm defining let. So obj. So it is an any type. It is an object. And here I am adding one colon, suppose some t, that is the object type, because we are configuring as any type. That means it is any type of value. So here it is having object, and here we are configuring. This is one object. So another object we are creating, let obj, and so obj2, and here we are defining some string type. So this is here. So that is one. Some values are configured in this way. So sorry, t and colon 1. I'm configuring the values in this way. Actually, it is allowing here to show you these values. That means it is number and a key type. But actually, as I already showed you, if you remembered, generally, if you remembered, when we discussed about arrays, I told you 1, 2, 3, all are string type only. I hope you remembered that. Even you are giving those as numeric, it will not treat them as numeric. It will be treating the properties as a string type only. I have showed you in array type concept. That means you may think that it is allowing now, but it is allowing. That means if I say true here, true is a property, but actually it will treat it as a string type. It is not a Boolean type. It is not a Boolean type. It is a string type. That means it will treat that as true as a string, one as a string. That means it can handle keys only of string type. But whereas here it can be defined with different types. Even a function can be as a key. That function can return any specific value. Function can be used as a key. That is very important about map. And so another point is here, size can be, that means the number of items of a map, number of items in a map can be easily accessed. That means the number of items in a map is easily retrieved from its size property. Actually, it's a size property. And object, the number of items in an object, the number of items in an object must be determined manually. That means how many items are there in an object, you have to define manually, until or unless it is using an array of objects. If it is array of objects, then you can use the length. But if I ask that in this object how many properties are there, there is no length property for this to understand how many properties are there. There can be so many properties. That means here I said name, so TV, and we say price here. Now if I ask how many properties are there in this object, there is no option obj.length, nothing is there. That means I don't know how many keys are present, how many values are present, how many is there. But manually you have to do that. We have to write an iterator through that. We have to write. It is not easy to identify how many items are there in this memory. That is another important point. And a very important iteration. Actually, map is, that is the specialty. Map is an iterable. It is an iterable. So that it can be directly. It can be directly iterated. It is an self-iterable. It can directly iterate and read the values. That means iterating over an object requires obtaining its keys in by obtaining its keys and values. So with, you learned that with we can do that. For in, we can use manually do that. We have to use for in for manually dealing with it, right? In operator we have to deal with that. So that's right? That's important. Right now, another option is performance is better. Performance is better as you can easily add or remove items, add or remove keys dynamically, easily add or remove keys dynamically. So that means here again adding a property, that means not object is not optimized for frequent, it is frequent, it is not designed for frequent additions and removals of key value pairs, key and value pairs, key and value pairs. That means it is not easy. How you can delete any property? You can delete any property from an object. You remembered we learned about delete operator. Am I right? We can use a delete operator to delete a property. What do you say? Am I right? We can use a delete operator to delete a property. How you can add a new property? How you can add a new property into object? How you can add a new property into object? So you haven't learned anything about that. That means it requires extensibility. You have to extend the object and add new property. Without extensibility, you cannot add items, add new properties into the object. These are all the technical issues we were facing with objects. And to overcome these issues, from ES6, they designed the concept of maps. So maps have all these advantages over objects. So when you are dealing with a key value reference, better go with map. So instead of using an object. So depending on the situation, we can work with both keys and objects, a combination with along with another option sets also. Right? How do we use this map? How do we work with the map? What are the properties available with the maps? That we will see in our next session. Right? Tomorrow we will, Monday we will continue with that. In 2-3 more sessions are there. After 3 sessions, we will finish TypeScript. Mostly by Thursday, we will start working with our Angular concepts. We will start into the Angular concepts now. Okay. So now I will post some exercises for you. You try those more exercises in the Google Classroom. I will post some exercises. You try them. Right. So Monday we will continue with these maps and sets, and we will see what are new in that. Okay.